Great. Thank you so much, Natalia. I'm super excited about this excellent panel that we have accumulated today. I think between the panelists, they have more than 100 years of cumulative experience, and it is just a great pleasure for me to be moderating this session. Without much ado, what I will do is just jump into my first section, which is more of a warm-up round. I will take a few questions with each of the panelists, and you can answer them almost as rapid fire questions. I'll have three questions, and we can follow the same order. I will start with Gerd. We'll move to Hans, then Amar, and then Krishna. And I'll have three questions. The first question, Gerd, for you would be, what do you think, Gerd, and you spent more than 3 decades in Siemens and overall the healthcare space. What do you think would be the top 3 applications that will transform medical device engineering?
Well, I wouldn't say the top 3 applications, but the top 3 or top 2 technologies that will transform the smart device development. And I mean, this is, of course, number 1, artificial intelligence, which will become more and more relevant for the medical devices, but not only for the medical devices, also for the post-processing, for analyzing images and all these kind of things. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, I mean, artificial intelligence to some extent also works on data. So we are generating more and more data within the healthcare sector. So the whole topic of data analytics is something which will become more and more relevant. And as we talk about different modalities, devices, and so on and so forth, so what also will become more and more relevant is the whole topic of connectivity, which brings me to the third topic, which is IoT, or Internet of Medical Things, to be precise.
Wow, interesting, Gerd. Thank you. Those are really, really crisp and precise. Hans, you have been with Philips doing core research for, like you just mentioned, more than 25 years now. The same question to you. What would be the top 3 applications to transform medical device engineering?
Yeah, so first of all, obviously, I fully concur with Gerd. So he has named the ones. I would like to add to that technology is one thing, but important is to keep an eye on what is really needed in terms of improving healthcare, improving access to care, and being inspired by the needs. And of course, medical devices and medical device technologies will enable to get closer to people, closer to patients, being able to share information that is vital to address the needs of future healthcare, both in the developed world as well as in areas where there is lack of access to care. And indeed, it's the data, but the data are produced by technologies, and IoT certainly is one. You see in the meantime, and we are very much focusing on that, bringing ultrasound, for instance, closer to users and customers, which means that also new technologies are stepping up to the game, where we can really provide new insights that are vital for clinical decision taking. And obviously the AI, the data-driven solutions will facilitate making use of that information in terms of better treatment of people and patients. And that, I think, is a vital element as well, is the connectivity. The telehealth, telemedicine application, teleradiology applications, where you leverage the data, leverage the information that is produced locally in order to come to better decision taking and supporting care providers and therefore also people and patients wherever they are. And I think that's also an important element to add.
Wow, excellent, excellent, very well articulated, Hans. And I think some of the themes are really coming across, and we'll build upon that. Amar, from your perspective, same question. What is your perspective?
I completely agree. I mean, what Gerd and Hans mentioned, and I think they have already spoken about key technologies which are changing the landscape in the medical device industry, which is artificial intelligence, connectivity. I will drill down a little more on the artificial intelligence topic. And I think inside this, I think machine learning is something which is going to transform the medical devices. Today, so most of our medical devices, they are based on certain core principles, and they are the principles of either the physics or the chemistry. Either you take a CT scanner or an ultrasound or our blood testing devices, they are based on those core principles. Now, and based on top of that, we have built those devices which are many, many years back, and we are still using those technologies. The capability of those devices are static capability. Like you buy a scanner, it is a particular configuration of the CT scanner remains like that. When you apply the machine learning in that, the capability of the devices improves over a period of time, and that's transformational. And also it's customized. So the customized in the sense like it can behave differently based on the population. So a particular device can behave differently in Europe and can behave differently in India. So I think that's something which is really transformational in the medical device industry, and it's happening. And other than the cloud connectivity, other important thing is that the automation in hospitals, in clinical setups, in lab setups. I think now the importance to the speed is really has increased, and now the workflows which require so much of manual intervention, which takes more time, and also it is prone to errors. So bringing more automation inside the labs, I think that is something which is crucial for the medical devices.
Excellent, Amar. I think that's an interesting point that you brought up. Almost, if I may call it, Teslatization of medical devices, especially the large equipment, building in machine learning, building in a lot more software capability that can not just elongate the life but improve the actual ability of them as well. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Amar. Krishna, from your side, you have had the advantage of being at a place where you have looked at multiple large organizations trying to do this, right? So it'll be really interesting to get your take on the same question.
Absolutely, no, sure. It's not easy to top on the great points that we talked about, but let me give an attempt here. I think I'll probably give it the connotation of how some of the technologies have actually accelerated because of COVID, right? So one such thing which we see common across most of the medtech companies today is how providing care is moving out of hospital and getting closer to a patient, or even in a community setup, right? And this is across the care continuum. It could be about even a disease detection. It could be about some diagnostic related activities being done. It could be a therapeutic one, or it could be even a post-care. So in each of these segments, given that COVID during COVID times, we saw that hospitals were so much cluttered. How do we effectively provide these care outside of a hospital setting, right? And very interesting use cases. For example, we take from a therapeutic perspective, dialysis, right? I mean, dialysis is so critical for a patient. The companies in that space have had their own products on the peritoneal dialysis, but how do we make sure that it is being used properly? The fluids that are required to be replenished are delivered. The values that the data that come out of it is being monitored by some community nurse in a setting. So those are very, very important requirements. And from a post-care perspective, things have moved from not about just the lifestyle part of it or measuring some critical biomarkers. It has even moved to the space of cardiovascular, where Today, pacemakers are enabled to talk to your smartphone, which in turn can be monitored by a healthcare practitioner. So that's a very critical space that I see. The other one probably I would add is the rapid increase of robotic surgery, right? And again, not just in the general surgery areas. Now it has gone from general surgery to gastrointestinal to urology to ophthalmology, again to orthopedic. What many of our clients that we see are trying to do is how do we do this in a ambulatory care, not in a hospital setting, but we do it in an ambulatory care. We do it in a minimally invasive way. The hospitalization time is reduced. Can we do it even let's say a knee replacement for a patient within a day? So the patient is in and out in a day, and that saves cost, that saves time, that lessens the burden on the hospital. And of course, last but not the least, I definitely concur on the AI part of what was discussed. So those would be my three top technologies.
Very, very interesting, Krishna. I really liked how you gave a very clear therapeutic point of view on some of the top ones, right? Just one of the things that came up in one of the interesting discussions we were having with one of the largest PLM players in this space, and they were talking about how they are trying to do a lot of the work that used to be done manually in terms of taking on the therapeutic side, like looking at a heart and figuring out how a medical device interacts with it, etc. All of them completely in a 3D simulation. So almost like how in normal engineering they're calling it biosimulation or the digital twin of the body itself. So I think that's also an interesting technology to look out for. Great. So I think I've done with my first question. Gerd, the second question, starting from you. Where do you think med devices companies should focus their R&D effort to win in the future? What do you think are the top 2 or 3 areas, or what are the big things that they should focus on?
I mean, I can tell you what we are focusing on, and this is clearly to increase the value in healthcare, in delivering better outcomes at lower cost. And at Siemens Healthineers, this basically focuses on 4 strategies or on 4 parameters. This is number 1, expanding the precision medicine. Number 2, transforming care delivery. Number 3, to improve the patient experience. And number 4, to digitalize healthcare per se. We also believe to focus on these 4 areas will transform the medical device engineering landscape. I won't go into all those 4 areas into detail because I probably could talk about any of those 4 topics for an hour. So I leave it on those 4 areas: expanding precision medicine, transform care delivery, improve patient experience, and digitalize healthcare.
Okay, excellent, Gerd. We'll pick you up on at least one of them as we move towards a more detailed discussion. Hans, from your perspective, you've been focused significantly on research. Where do you think the focus is or should be going forward?
Yeah, so from Philip's perspective, our focus is really on outcomes. Which we measure what we call the quadruple aim. Clinical outcomes, so the quality that we provide, obviously in an efficient and cost-effective way. And so the combination of the two is always referred to as value-based healthcare. But in addition to that, we really focus on the impact on patient-reported outcomes and experiences, and obviously the impact on the care provider, the care professional. Particularly at this time, I have a lot of interactions with healthcare professionals. There's big pressure on the workforce. And there innovations in digital devices, but particularly integrating the data into broader solutions that make life easier for those people that need to be treating patients, need to take care of patients, is extremely important. At the moment with the pandemic raging, the pressure on medical professionals is huge.
Well, that's a
There,
very unique perspective you bring, Hans. Just as everyone is talking about workforce and their ability to manage themselves, it's I think that's a good point you mentioned. How healthcare workers we can look at improving their the way that they execute their job. Excellent, thank you, Hans. Amar, from your perspective, the top focus areas from research perspective, R&D perspective. Sorry.
I think Beckman Coulter, we are into the lab diagnostics. Our focus area is one is expanding our menu. So each devices, they can provide a certain set of parameters. So I think we are working on different ways to expand the menu. So the same device can provide the more parameters. So I think that will help the patient and the hospital. For example, like recently, we have for our hematology products, we have added the capability to detect sepsis. Now, those type of things which are really like the patient, which used to know after 3 or 4 days that whether they have sepsis or not, and that those 3 4 days are really crucial for the patient life. They can get to know like on their first technology test itself. So like that's expanding the menu. The other key thing that we are focusing as we are implementing more and more technologies in terms of connecting the devices to the cloud and things like that. As I just mentioned, that we are automating the workflow in the laboratory. And just to let you know, like when a blood sample is taken in a tube, and when it flows through the laboratory, and by the time you get the results, there are 33 manual steps which are required on an average. Okay, what we are developing is the technology where you reduce the 33 steps to 1 step. You just put the blood sample, and automatically everything gets automated, and you get the results. So I think that reduces the error, that brings the speed, that reduces the burden on the workforce to do a lot of manual things, which otherwise they can do more useful work. So I think those are some of the key areas that we are focusing.
Interesting, Amar. I think a common thread emerging between what Hans said and what you mentioned as well. Although there are many people who are not necessarily believe that automating everything improves the ability of the actual workforce to do things better. So, but we'll take that as we discuss more. Krishna, your perspective, again from your vantage point.
Sure. So, tying into what my co-panelists spoke, all the medical device companies, right, are transforming into a medical technology company or medtech company. That's how we are all known today in the marketplace, right? And some of the very good points we talked about, how being patient-centric, value-based care, outcome being measured, then the service that is being rendered. So the underlying point to all of this is all the devices, irrespective of where they play in the care delivery system, are connected today. And going back to the theme of the discussion today about making it scalable and smart, what is really required is a connected ecosystem in a secure platform, right? I mean, that is a very underlying key element to making all this work in the way we want. And I would definitely compliment what Philips has done of building a platform called HSTP, which sits on Amazon, which is in a way a regulated IoT platform, which makes many of the companies to take their use case or being patient-centric or providing the continuum care for a patient much faster to the market than what it is. So I think that part of the architecture or aspect of making a device connected is very, very important as we look at future.
Great. Thank you, Krishna. And I've had you go last for the previous two questions. So maybe for my last question, we can reverse the order. Krishna, so you can take the final question on the warm-up round. What do you think is the foremost challenge in terms of growth in this particular healthcare and med devices space?
So that's a difficult question, but I'll try. From my vantage point, as you just put it, as I see the market space, is there are the medical device companies who have been well established and probably I think I keep saying this. If you look at our medical device industry, it's very easy to segment. Probably the top 15 or 20 companies, is about 55 to 60% of the entire market share. And then there are the rest. But what we are seeing in the last probably 10 years or 15 years is how new age companies have been able to come and innovate and disrupt the whole thing, right? I mean, for example, colonoscopy, which is done in a very traditional way, today can be done by molecular devices, right? I mean, there's a company called Exact System, which says you can do it without being intrusive. It's very, very different. I mean, there are products where you can look at do a retina scanning, also give an early indication whether you have diabetes or not, right? And then look at the adoption of even robotic surgery. If you roll back the time to let's say the early 2000s, Da Vinci, the robotic surgery which was launched, was very innovative, new at that time. And you fast forwarded today, every major company, a medtech company, has got into that space, and there's enormous potential there. So I think the challenge that I see from my standpoint is how these great companies like Siemens, Philips, Danaher, and some of the other companies, how can you marry the traditional R&D development to something which is so disruptive, and that comes, just like a consumer industry where somebody is able to come up with a sensor, a smartphone, underlying infrastructure, and can provide some critical care or can deliver a care to a patient. I think marrying those two, I would say, is probably the biggest challenge that I see in front of many of these companies.
Interesting, Krishna. So you spoke about niche, specialized, almost startup-like companies. So one of our customers referred to it as the battle between the big established elephants and a swarm of bees, because there's not just one startup, but many of them. So yeah, it's an interesting take. We'll develop that further. Amar, from your perspective, from Danaher and maybe Beckman Coulter's perspective, top growth challenge that you foresee?
Firstly, I completely agree with what Krishna was saying, and I think maybe I can add a couple of things to that. Is as he mentioned, right, the market share of 20 companies and rest, is pretty huge difference today. Now, but as the advancement of the newer technologies, the barrier to enter into the medical device industry is slowly reducing. And it has been there in other industries also. Okay. But we have seen some changes in the other industries. For example, like the biggest transport company in the world today is Uber. Okay. Or maybe the biggest hotel company in terms of the one of the biggest hotel company in terms of the room inventory is oil. Okay. So the similar things can happen in the medical device industry also as the technologies are advancing. And I think one of the reasons, like for the smaller companies, newer companies or startups, they don't have a baggage of what the bigger companies have, which sometimes become their disadvantage, in terms of the set processes which they need to change, or the workforce which I would not say incompetent, but they are not competent enough in the newer technologies and things like that. So the newer companies can change faster, I think. So what is required is the speed of change and the new way to develop the medical devices, I think, and which can be done a lot more with going with partnerships and things like that. I think,
Great. Thank you, Amar. Hans, I'm sure you take a very long-term view on this, right? When you focus on research. So where do you see like a long-term growth challenge in this space?
Yeah, so there's a number of challenges, I think. I like the comments of Krishna about also the new enterprises entering, and I'm looking at basically the future as being a networked system where many companies will work together. We see, of course, great advances in medical technology devices, particularly in the minimal invasive area and in more precise diagnosis. But in the end, it's about integration of both development on the device side, but also development on the application and insight side, on the side of analytics, of AI and machine learning. Therefore, I believe that platforms are there to stay, and standardization actually is one of the major needs to enable that in order to enable this networked approach. Krishna also mentioned our HealthSuite digital platform that enables that, but of course there's also others that provide these platforms and where we need to link to, and that is a very important development. But in the end, really the implementation of all the opportunities, bringing together the devices, the information, the data that enable the future of sustainable healthcare requires adoption, requires opportunity to actually use these data, to share the data, and to translate all the data and information into solutions and applications that are really being used. And there a transformation is needed, both on the side of the healthcare professionals to really get comfortable with using these new technologies and solutions, which also requires, I think, adoption in the curriculum of medical students. And it requires confidence and trust from us, from people using and getting used, being engaged in the solutions that we can offer. And that, I think, is probably, and certainly at this moment in time, something that requires investment in time, in attention, in training and education, and the generation of trust.
Excellent, Hans. I like how you mentioned the last point on trust, and we'll develop on that as well. Gerd, you will have the final word on the foremost challenge that you see in this space.
Talking about the challenge, I would like to bring a completely different perspective to the discussion. In principle, I mean, my answer is written in the back of my screen. Yeah, so what you can read there, that is the purpose of Siemens Healthineers. We pioneer breakthroughs in healthcare for everyone, everywhere. Yeah, and when we talk about growth, when we talk about improving healthcare for people worldwide, then it's essential that we look at problems that we have today in the world. And as a matter of fact, there are billions of people who do not have access to care. I mean, simply look at India. Yeah, I mean, in India, we have 70% of the people living in rural areas. The access to care is not guaranteed. The quality of care is, well, an area for improvement, let me put it that way. And the cost, the affordability is also a topic. And that doesn't apply only for India, that applies for areas in Africa and other regions in the world as well. So we definitely don't provide, as of today, access to care for everyone and not everywhere. And this is where we have to work on, so that we really provide access to care, that we or increase it, that we improve the quality of care, and that we make it affordable across the globe, and not only in Europe and not only in the US or in the big cities in Asia. And this is, let's say, also the purpose which we, this is a purpose statement which we launched about 2 weeks ago. So it's really new, especially through the combination with Siemens Healthineers and Varian, and the focus on cancer care. But this is, from my point of view, where we need to focus on if we would like to grow in the future and really make sure that we have health care provided for everybody across the globe.
Excellent, Gerd. Gerd, maybe I will stick with you as I move to my next and final section. So here we'll take we take a little bit more, spend some time on some of the areas. Maybe you can elaborate a little more on each of these questions, maybe with some more examples from your side. The first question and the first subsection within this one is mainly around what is the overall engineering and design charter and innovation charter as companies look forward. So in the first question to you, Gerd, in that section is, what do you see as some of the main medical device design investments that you have done or your organization has done, which you think is actually reaping benefits right now and which you are really leveraging currently?
Well, I mean, this really is individual from modality to modality. Just to give you one example, what we've recently launched is a CT scanner where we have integrated photon counting, where we are in a position to increase the quality of the images at a much lower dose. And the whole process of photon counting, for example, the technology is something which is now, well, in Germany, there's an award which is given away every year by the German president. It's the German President Award, how it's called, and you can apply for that. And the photon counting approach now is nominated for this award. Don't know if we will win it. I mean, there's a process, but I think we are amongst the last three. And this is a totally new technology. Other topics, I mean, if you look at it, which we are working on, we talked about the topics of precision medicine, transforming care delivery, improving patient experience, digitalizing care. The whole topic when we talk about improving the patient's experience. Yeah? So that you have, let's say, systems which automatically position the patient. If you have an MRI scanner, so everybody is different. Yeah, there are people who are, let's say, have different body shapes, who have more weight, less weight, and so on and so forth, which also requires, let's say, different preparations if you prepare a patient for a scan. And there, in the meantime, we have topics where we can automate this. Other topics like what I've mentioned before, the whole topic of artificial intelligence, where we integrate the medical imaging with the analytics. So there are, I would say, almost hundreds of topics where we apply latest technology to improve patient experience, to increase the accuracy, and also to make it individual, the whole patient experience.
Excellent. Excellent, Gerd. Thank you for that perspective. Amar, I will come to you now. You spoke about how, and you kind of alluded to how normal medical devices are moving towards being Teslatized or becoming smart, if I use a normal word. So to align to that or to build that, what are some of the top capabilities that you as an organization are trying to develop, build, or invest in?
I think what we are, as I was mentioning, is the devices which are based out of or they on the chemistry or the physics principles, right? We are working on changing that, applying the newer technologies, which is in the imaging and machine learning, so we can achieve the similar things what we used to achieve by the traditional principles by applying these newer technologies. And what happens with this is we gain the speed and the accuracy. Now, the challenge here is how do you adapt? I mean, for example, like when in a traditional device, you may be taking certain number of images, and based on those images, you make certain conclusions, right? And when you apply a newer technology, then you take the images which are 1,000 times more than the previous one. Okay. Now the challenge is that how do you process it? Okay. But thanks to the technologies which is available today, which was not available before, so now we don't use CPUs, we use CPUs, which is like 1,000 times faster than a CPU, so that can process. Okay, And the advancement in the also, like now we have the cameras which can take very precise images at of a moving object itself. So for something that earlier we used to do, let's say, a manual intervention of a lab technician when he's looking at a sample through a microscope, those type of things can be automated. Okay, and I think so that is something which is we are working on many things. I can't tell in this conference, but using these technologies, we are completely working on kind of transforming the diagnostic industry where when we have those devices in the market.
Excellent, Amar. Thank you for that. Hans, I will come to you now. And as you have seen, I mean, over your overall, the many years that you have spent and your position where you actually peer into the future, how do you see the trajectory of medical devices applications which have changed because of some of the newer technologies that Amar mentioned and Gerd was hinting to? How have you seen that transition?
Yeah, so there's several vectors that we can follow. One is, of course, the technology vector, where new technologies come to. If you look at application of AI, for instance, it can be applied on the application side, but it can also be applied, for instance, to do faster scans. So as an example, with compressed sense using AI, we can accelerate the scanning time of an MR. Basically, at some point in time, it's important to look at the final result in all we do. It's not about cost of equipment, it's about cost of delivering a diagnostic outcome. It's about the cost of, in the end, taking care of a person, of a patient. And in that context, I think we see a complete move from a focus on devices and what devices can do, technologies where there is, of course, advances as well, to realizing what in the end is the outcome and what is the cost that this outcome takes. So accelerating the whole procedure can have much more of an impact than maybe doing something to a device. And so things that we are developing, basically taking a radiology department, making it more efficient, and basically delivering images, delivering diagnostic information, where in fact the technology that is being used is a function of the final outcome. So I think that is a very important change that I see happening. The second important change that we are working on as well is creating a link between the information, the data, the device, and the actual use. And there in between are things like application of teleradiology, implementation of intelligence, AI or remote in driving outcomes, connecting the dots. Let me give one example. Obviously, we are a market leader in terms of patient monitoring in the intensive care unit. There we have lots of very fancy equipment to really give very close monitoring of patients. We can also do that remote and provide input by specialists. But the same kind of monitoring we can bring with a somewhat more simple approach to the general wards, where actually still a number of people may die unattended because there's no close watch being implemented. And then we have also an opportunity to take the same kind of measurement outside of the hospital and follow the patient, for instance, with vital signs monitoring, cardiac parameters, for instance, to have a connection between the patient at home and the treating physician, say the cardiologist, that wants to monitor and follow up to make sure that there is no recurrence of disease and that recurrence is caught early. And that means patients can go home earlier, will be taken care of remotely. When something occurs, we can intervene. And that is, I would say, the ultimate of connected care, that obviously can be applied in a highly developed setting, but also enables to take care to less supervised settings, bringing care, I would say, across the globe, and address the needs wherever a person may be. I'm a little bit quoting Gerd, of course, but that is really what we need to do. And we really need to look at the needs, make sure that we address them, and the technologies will follow suit. But again, I repeat, we also need to make sure that people can use the technologies, can apply the technologies, and feel comfortable using the technologies. And that remains, of course, a focal point to keep in mind.
Excellent. Thank you, Hans. Krishna, as you work with different companies, moving from the last few years to now in terms of adopting new technologies, moving towards smart devices, how have the asks changed? What is it more that companies are asking you to do or challenging you to do nowadays?
Sure, a good question. So again, I mean, with the advantage of we having to see some of the top medtech companies, how they work, and their own demands have changed. So one I would say is while each of these companies are trying to make their device smart, but the question also is, as the co-panelists were talking about, how do we make this smart to make sure that it provides a solution to a patient, right? It becomes patient-centric. There is a care delivered in a meaningful way. Can it be part of a clinical decision support system? Can it solve a problem? So some examples that I would quote as a company that we work for, making patient mobility beds, which are used in critical care setup. The challenge or the problem statement that company had was, can you make this smart in a way that we can measure the heart rate, the respiratory rate of a patient, and can I do risk stratification of the patient in a hospital so that a nurse can attend to the patient with higher risk and lower risk? Can I use AI to see with these data points? Can I use AI to even detect sepsis, early detection of sepsis? Very different problem statement. The other one I would quote is a continence care, a company making continence care, trying to see, can we use algorithms and AI to detect onset of a patient in an elderly patient that is using a continence care product. Again, very different problem statement from a design standpoint from what we used to be asked, let's say, a few years before. The other that I would add here is many of these companies want to get to the market, at least to the proof of concept stage, very quickly. So there are changing needs saying, can you guys do in your own quality systems and come up with the functioning prototypes, within, let us say, what traditionally used to take 6 months or 8 months, can you guys do it in 2 months? Let's see if this particular technology or a concept works or not. So I would say we are getting much closer to, let's say, how today the software world works, where there are hackathons, there are ideas which are thought of, implemented, tried out, and there's a result that comes out in a very, very quick and a rapid manner. Those probably are the two top things that I would say that I've been seeing.
Excellent, Krishna. Thank you. So I'll move to my second subsection, and this is about data and the other emerging technologies. And Amar, at the start of the session, you spoke a lot about machine learning and data. And so I'll come to you for the first question. In many of the discussions we've had with some of the customers, one of the challenges that they look at when they imagine engineering, it's very hard for them to put a demarcation or how do you marry data, how do you marry technology and product? So how do you exactly think about these 2-3 things, right? Is data a product, is data a technology, or is how do you actually think about it from a engineering perspective?
I think I will give example from the our technical point of view. I think few years back, we were working on, our whole focus was to bring ability in our devices to connect the cloud. So that was our whole focus. I mean, I'm saying a few years back, and quickly we were able to do that. And once we did that, okay, then we got into another big challenge. Okay, now there is so much of data getting generated. Now, what do you do with that data? And how do you process the data? And now the biggest problem is that the data which is getting generated, that's not a structured data. I mean, you can only do something with that data once you have to clean. So I think cleaning the data is the biggest challenge. And the amount of data which is getting generated now, not only like in baking colder, but across that, when we see that people have all the time for a patient, right? Patient is generating data all the time. They have variables, they have whatnot. So I think the number of digital touch points to the patient is enormous. And the data which is getting generated out of that is enormous. Now, the biggest challenge, I think, also to the medical device companies, that going to our previous question, is how to process this data and what do we do with this data? I think that is something which we are not able to crack today. And on top of that, we are in a medical device industry. So there are various regulations that we need to follow. So we can't just move around data just like that. So we need to clean the data. We anonymize the patient information, from there. So with such an enormous data, we need to perform so many operations on the data before we do anything with the data. So I think that is the biggest challenge. And I think at least we are not able to solve that so far. And I think, but that's the bigger opportunity that exists also.
Excellent, excellent, Amar. Thank you for that perspective. Gerd, again, I'll come to you on this part. And you mentioned a few things at the start, right? You mentioned IoT, you mentioned connected, and definitely you also touched upon data. How do you see, the coming together of all these technologies changing the landscape of healthcare and medical devices?
Well, bringing all these topics together brings me to our long-term vision of healthcare. So what we believe how healthcare in the future, or what healthcare in the future will be, it's in principle a digital twin of an individual and so-called pathway companions. So the digital twin of an individual will tell the individual in which state of health an individual is in. And if the digital twin, with the digital twin, in principle, you can also imagine with simulation to forecast that somebody will fall sick after some time if it doesn't change certain behaviors. And well, I think it will be inevitable that from time to time somebody will fall sick. But then the question, once you're sick, is also how do I become healthy again? And this is what we call pathway companions. So in addition to the digital twin of an individual, you will have so-called pathway companions, which are disease-specific, which will support the decision-making from the diagnosis to the therapy till somebody has fully recovered. And this is in principle the future of medicine based on data, based on AI, and so forth. But first, many additional questions. I mean, what we didn't talk about, you mentioned the data. And when we talk about data processing, a central question from my point of view that also needs to be answered is, who owns the data? And not only the data per se, but also metadata that are being derived from the raw data. And we have a clear opinion on that. The data is being owned by the patient. And by the way, this is also something now, if you look at the whole discussion about social media like Facebook, it's also about data, about ownership, what they derive out of the data. And in healthcare, I'm of the opinion the owner of the data has to be the individual. Let me finish with the last vision. In principle, the healthcare, today we talk about healthcare, but in principle, it's not healthcare what we are doing, it's sick care. So somebody has fallen sick, and then we use the modalities to analyze what happened and so on and so forth, and we try to cure the people. With the concept of the digital twin, it really becomes more to well-being and ensuring that people do not fall sick. And this is the true healthcare of the future, the digital twin plus the pathway companions, based upon AI, data, and so on and so forth.
Excellent, Gerd. I think you hit many notes in one verse. You spoke about data and the things around who owns it. In fact, that is one of the questions that we've already got from the audience. So I'll maybe have Hans develop on that. And you also spoke about the multiple other things which we will develop. So Hans, coming to you, like I hinted, the whole theme around data marrying with technology and those. So what is your take on that? And maybe you could also develop on the point that Gerd touched upon, which we also have as a question in terms of data and the ethics around it and the ownership around that, etc.
Yeah, so let's begin with the last question. The ownership of data is with the individual that is laid down in Europe in what is called the GDPR. And in all the applications that we develop, we apply those rules, which I think really put the ownership of data and information where it should reside. At the same time, I think in order to basically develop applications and make it possible to leverage the data, obviously there need to be, I would say, a mechanism to make sharing of data easier, because that will drive the solutions going forward. And in my experience, patients realize that I would say donating data, like donating organs, really benefits all. But that does not, I would say, diminish at all the right of the individual on their personal data. And that is, I think, fully concur with Gerd in that respect. The other question is about so how does this world with data develop, and the opportunities that we can see on the basis of having access to data. I think data and solutions based on data are just a means to an end. In the end, it's about taking care of people and enabling to do that. And increasingly, with the pressure on the healthcare system, it means also that you really have to try to enable and empower people also to take care of themselves. So it's about providing information, it's providing support, it's about really showing and interpreting information in such a way that people can understand it, that care providers can share information, and this applies, I would call it end-to-end. In principle, the period in hospital is an episode, which preferably takes as short as possible, but I would say linking to extramural, outside of hospital care, enabling patients or people and their environment to live in with a good quality of life. That I think is the end goal, and that is the focus we should have with providing data. And the data are the basis for the information we derive from it. The data should be appropriate for the condition in which they are being used, so that you can translate the data into insights that will really help people to take care of themselves and being taken care of, being supported. And so it's not the data is the enabler, but it is the way that we touch people's lives, the way that we interact with people, with patients and with healthy people, that in the end will be decisive. And there, the quality of the data, the robustness of the application, the ability to share the data, standardization, agreeing on interoperability between devices produced by different vendors, for instance, and allowing that data to be used, to be integrated, and to be translated in meaningful use. That is, I think, what is important.
Excellent, Hans. And I think you really took the discussion to the depth that we really wanted to from the data and the integration perspective. Thank you for that, Hans. A very useful practitioner perspective that you shared. Krishna, on this topic, I know LTTS has been doing a lot in terms of supporting customers. In this new age of technology, data, and smart devices, what kind of solutions and platforms are you deploying to enable this type of digitally driven care outcomes? Something that Gerd spoke about as pathways, and Hans also touched upon.
Sure. No, thanks for that questions. I think as we learned from the discussion today, the use cases and the amount of the data that is to be managed, both structured, unstructured, and the devices that you have to integrate with is a huge, enormous subject. There is no one or two solutions that's going to fit all. I think the ability of somebody like us, a technology company, is our ability to work with the ecosystem. Right. There are the leading cloud players in the market. There are multiple platform players in the market. There are various AI solutions as point solutions in the market. In fact, I'll even quote this example: Nuance, which is a speech recognition software which was developed for automotive, today is used in hospitals so that a radiologist can integrate it to a radiology, and it could be a CT, MR, or whatever it is, and then you could make your notes, through your voice commentary itself. So it's ability of working with the ecosystem, which is in my opinion far more meaningful and required than there is no one fit all solutions as such. Nevertheless, there are a few point solutions that we have tried to take initiative and start building it in-house. These are directed towards disease reduction for things like sepsis. In radiology, we have talked about what Gerd talked about, providing care in a market like India, where not all images, let's say an ultrasound image, it could be for whatever is the disease detection there. All images are not of the same quality. So is there a way you can use AI to enhance an image so that disease reduction becomes far better? The risk is very minimal. So those are some of the solutions that we have developed. On the robotics side, what we have also tried to take a next step is having a robotic, minimally invasive surgery devices is very good, but training a surgeon or a doctor to be very functional to that is a very different subject altogether. So we have started taking initiatives and developing, training devices for that, training systems for that, so that the adoption of robotic surgery is more faster than what it is today. So those are some of the initiatives that we have taken into.
Yeah, excellent, Krishna. Thank you for that. Now I'll move into my final section. I know we just have about 10 minutes to go for this panel. So I just about 3 questions, and maybe if there is time, I'll take 1 or 2 more audience questions. I will start with you, Gerd, on this one. And this section is mainly on ecosystem leverage and talent. So Siemens have known to be, a company that really works very well together with multiple portions and companies across the value chain. And as you peer into the future, and you spoke about the areas that Siemens Healthineers wants to focus on, how do you see the contribution of your value chain partners How do you see them and you working together to help build some of this future-ready devices?
Well, we've always been working closely together with the ecosystem in the past, and of course we will do this in the same way in the future as well. Be it in India, be it in other regions in the world. In India, you probably have heard about that we launched a technology accelerator about 1.5 years ago in April 2020, which focuses to identify startups and also the startup ecospheres which are relevant for us, and where we try to bring radically innovative technologies into Siemens Healthineers, where we also validate relevance and maturity of external innovations by prototyping technologies on Siemens Healthineers use cases, or where we facilitate the interaction between the startups and Siemens Healthineers and connect to Siemens Healthineers business and incubators. Besides that, we also developed a platform called Team Play, where we try to create a specific ecosystem for healthcare devices, for device manufacturers, for hospitals, so for care providers, and so on and so forth. So where we also create a community. So we are not only participating in the ecosystem, we are also creating ecosystems in this way. And this is open, this is vendor independent, this platform. So in principle, I would say we use all possible ways today to participate in the ecosystem, but not only participate, but also create the ecosystem, because we firmly believe, looking at the challenges ahead, you need to have networks. Networks of also, let's say, partners, maybe companies that are competing in some areas, but to find solutions for the main problems today, you need to work together in the ecosystem and not only rely on yourself, but work together closely.
Great. Thank you for that, Gerd. Amar, I will come to you. One is on this particular section, and then there is a audience question specifically for you. So I'll maybe have you look at both together. Firstly, on the ecosystem and talent perspective, how do you see the role of ecosystem partners evolving? I mean, from say about 5 years back, and you've been again doing this for the longest of time, right? How have you seen it 5 years back to now and into the future? What kind of partnerships are you expecting? And second, I think there was a specific question around location specific behavior of devices. So maybe you could take that as well.
Sure. Thanks. I think on your first point on the ecosystem and the partnership is the traditional way of developing the medical devices by these large companies. That has to change. Traditional way, usually, like if we have to develop a new device from scratch, okay, we will have our R&D workforce. We'll have mostly our own R&D workforce, FTEs working on that, hire and things like that. And even like in Beckman Coulter, to develop a new medical device from scratch and till the time we launch it, usually it has taken us at least 10 years. Yeah. So now, with the advancement of the newer technologies, and there is a need we can't wait for 10 years, because if we do it 10 years, then it will become obsolete by the time we launch it. We need to do it not 10 years. We need to expedite this cycle, maybe 2, 3 years or 4 years. Okay. And on top of that, we are going to implement the newer technologies. So how do we do that? We can't do it by ourselves. The way that we have been doing, the way forward is leveraging the partnerships. And I think finding the talent wherever it is available, whether it is available inside the organization, whether it is available outside the organization. And so I think many of the bigger projects that we are doing or the product development that we are doing, we are transforming ourselves. Many of the product development that we are doing in-house. We are doing maybe only 30% of the work. But then we are leveraging the partners wherever it is, maybe the boutique forms, let's say if you have to build an AI algorithm, it is futile to build a team and build the capability. It will take 5 years to do that. Instead, we can leverage somebody who can already help us. I think so. The future is partnership, and many of the big technologies companies, they are already advanced in such great technologies for maybe like Microsoft or Amazon or something similar to that. So I think future is partnership to deliver better products faster in a faster way. Coming to the question is, I mentioned one point of whether devices can behave differently in different situations. Okay, so let me clarify more on that. I think what I was mentioning is the capabilities in the device on the machine learning side. Now, what happens when you put a machine learning inside the device? More data that you feed into the device, eventually the device becomes smarter. Okay. So let's say there is a device in one lab, okay, and then there is a device in another lab. Eventually, the capabilities of these two devices can differ based on the amount of data that is getting churned out, getting into the. Yes, I think it's a very good question asked by Manoj. That yes, there are obligations and there is a regulatory framework that exists. So we have to do this inside the whatever is permitted within the regulatory framework. But by putting machine learning, there are many things that happens today. For example, like for many of our blood tests, we have reference ranges. Those reference ranges are different in Europe, in US, in China, and in India. Today, those reference ranges are fed manually. Okay, and even for a particular parameter in a blood, for example, like uric acid in a blood, is it okay to have a certain level of uric acid for a patient in India than patient in US because of the food habits and things like that? Okay. Today, the lab technicians, they manually put those things. I think these type of capabilities can be inbuilt into the devices, and eventually, yes, we need to work through the regulatory, work this within the regulatory framework, but this will happen. It will make our devices more smart.
Interesting, Amar. So what I gather is you could have the same smart device, but one could be smarter in my location versus that in your location. Yeah. So that's interesting in terms of how you could do that. Excellent. I think that's a very good point. Thanks, Amar. Hans, we just have enough time for one question, and I will take that last question with you. And sticking to the topic of ecosystem, and maybe you can develop on some of the areas on tech as well. But how do you see the need of the ecosystem evolving? Again, ecosystem is, Krishna spoke about this startups and digitally native companies, and we spoke about how there is Amazons and Microsofts of the world that you have leveraged to build platforms. So how do you see all of this coming together, the needs of the ecosystem changing as you move forward?
Yeah, so the ecosystem is needed to really drive innovative health and healthcare solutions. The ecosystem in the future is an ecosystem that delivers, as I mentioned before, networked care. And in the end, the ecosystem that delivers the networked care comprises of companies providing data, companies providing the integration of data, companies that I would say in the end touch the patient and the care providers' lives. And in the end, the healthcare is being delivered in a context. I liked, by the way, Amar's example. Because the context is also the local context, is also, I would say, indeed, the food intake, or is to some extent, obviously, also the environmental burden that has an impact, or lifestyle elements. And so in the end, delivering meaningful healthcare solutions means that you have to develop also these solutions in an ecosystem, where the data that is created by devices, integration of the data, and translating that into applications will also have a lot of local flavor. And therefore, it's very important to have these digital platforms that are open, like the Health Suite platform that we provide as Philips, and that can integrate, that can also host applications by local companies because it's fully open and has standardized interfaces adopting FHIR, which I think is also very important. And you can only develop network solutions if all these applications are fully open and standardized, so that you can integrate the data from the devices, but also can integrate to the applications. As an example, we have also an AI marketplace where small companies can basically contribute their applications and be rewarded for that, obviously, as well, which really is supporting such a networked delivery of care and care support. But in the end, I think it's getting close to the needs of the people, of the care providers, and making sure that we deliver outcomes that can be transparent and measurable.
Great. Thank you so much, Hans. And I think that, this has been a great session. I've made at least 2 pages of notes. I have learned a lot in this power-packed 60 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone. I will hand it back to Natalia to give the closing comments and also, formal thank you to each of you.